parties that Iran limit itself to a strictly civilian nuclear program with unprecedented verification and monitoring by the IAEA and the UN Security Council. Iran has committed to never developing or acquiring a nuclear weapon. The deal ensures this will be the case for at least 15 years, and likely longer, unless it repudiates the inspection regime and its commitments under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Additional Protocol. There is no more credible expert on nuclear weapons than Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, that's the current Obama administration Energy Secretary, who led the technical negotiating team, when he asserts that the plan blocks each of Iran's pathways to the fissile material necessary to make a nuclear weapon. Responsible people listen. 29 eminent U.S. nuclear scientists have endorsed Moniz's assertions. If the U.S. could have handed Iran a quote-unquote take it or leave it agreement, the terms doubtless would have been more onerous on Iran. But negotiated agreements, the only ones that get signed in times of peace, are compromises by definition. It's what President Reagan did with the Soviet Union on arms control. It's what President Nixon did with China. Given the status that someone like Brent Scowcroft has in American political lore and in strategic thinking, I think this is an extraordinarily brave statement on the one hand, and second, is going to begin to make some Republican congressmen and senators waver if it comes to the vote to override the veto. I think his words will be pushed fairly hard. It's also going to make it unlikely he's invited to many birthday parties of Republican congressmen. Let me just, two very quick thoughts on the impact on the region as a whole of this agreement. I think that on the whole, tamping down nuclear conflict would seem to be in the interest of most nations. Encouraging greater cooperation on dealing with IS would certainly be to the advantage of the Saudis, the Gulf states, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, and Iraq as well, regardless of what they may say in their public statements. And as far as South Africa, the impact on this country, just a sentence. Adding Iranian oil into the international oil market will seem to me to help lower oil prices rather than increase them. If you buy petrol, you're going to love it. If you sell it, you're going to put your head in your hands. For me, since I don't buy oil, I'm very happy with the way it was negotiated. I'm very happy with what I hope to be its results, and I'm hopeful that all the parties to the agreement, as well as all the parties that are going to be involved in enforcing it, adhere to their individual agreements as well as their requirements and their activities as part of it. And obviously we'll have some discussion after this and between us and among us all. Is that close to your time?
Yeah. Thank you, Brooks, and thank you, Zeinab. You might have noticed that the Iranian participant donated part of her time to the American, which was quite nice. Let me, without any further ado, open the floor for discussion. Questions, comments, all welcome. Ambassador. Unfortunately, we don't have a roving mic, but the room is small enough that we can hear each other. Noted.
My name is Dr. Hisham Ghalawi. I'm the Iraqi ambassador to South Africa. I've been in South Africa for 4.5 years. Thank you very much for setting up this important seminar, and also thank you for your two guests and their presentations, very informative presentations. One of the obviously likely positive outcome is to create an environment in the region and beyond that could lead to solving some of the important issues in the region beyond the nuclear deal. And this is true when it comes to the issues in Syria, in Yemen, obviously Iraq, and to have more effective regional international cooperation when it comes to fighting the rise of extremism and terrorism. Now, can we hear from you, both sides, how do you assess this, and what is required in order to change the mindset and the approach we've seen, not only from Iran and US, but also other regional international players, to capture the moment and to reach agreements based on the concept of win-win situation, and move away from negative competition that has led to obviously those conflicts with huge human cost for countries in the region and beyond.
Thank you, Ambassador. Could I ask the two panelists if you could just make a note of the questions? We'll take three at a time and then you can respond to them. Ebrahim at the back, please introduce yourselves as well, please.
I'm Ebrahim from AMEC. My question is to Brooks. Following American domestic American politics, what are the possibilities and how will this play out if, for example, okay, we assume that the current deal, Obama's veto will be able to institute the deal if Congress actually manages to oppose it and manages pass an opposition motion. What then happens in the 2016 election? Especially since, as we're talking, all the Republican candidates, none of them thus far has affirmed their support for the deal. So, assuming a Republican candidate wins in 2016, and then what are the chances, or how will what are the chances of the Republican candidate then overturning the deal, and how will this impact on the deal itself? Specifically because there's not been much sanctions multilaterally passed in 2009, and it's the U.S. and EU sanctions, which in my opinion were the main or the most stringent sanctions. So how will this how will this then affect the deal? Mainly because the U.S. has such tools at its disposal.
Thank you. Down here, Ambassador Saloji.
Yeah, I think we should look at a different perspective as well, because U.S. policy, both internal and foreign, is dictated not only by the ruling party, but obviously there's a great deal of say in it from the multinational corporations. Now, the multinational corporations have looked at the Middle East quite carefully, analyzed it and say, historically we've supported the wrong regimes in the Middle East. For example, Egypt, Israel to some extent, and so forth. And their view is, what have we gained by emotionally supporting these regimes, which has cost the US economy large amounts of money. Israel, since its inception, has sucked up an enormous amount of US aid, and so had Egypt and some other regimes. Saudi was an important player, but in these days it has become less important, simply because there are much more oil resources around the world, including in Iran. So it had no choice but to review its policies. With that in mind, it's looked at the Middle East as a whole and had taken a decision, both the Obama administration together with multinationals, that there are far more opportunities in Iran and its future than in the rest of the Middle East. So I think it's an important consideration. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ambassador Yusuf Saluji, former ambassador to Iran, South African ambassador to Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me invite the two speakers to...
Thanks for all three questions. They're very different, but I think there are some common themes. And I think the common theme is dealing with the future as opposed to looking backwards. Some very wise person said, predicting the future is inherently harder than predicting the past. And we're now caught really at a moment of prediction rather than assessing impact of past decisions. With regard to the first question, it's possible, although there's no way to know for sure, it's possible that this kind of agreement, if it carries through and if it is followed and adhered to by all the various parties, will have a modest effect on moving toward other issues. But it's not a guarantee because there's no deliberate thing within the agreement that links it to other issues. It's a standalone agreement and therefore its impact is, all right, we'll use the word moral in a sense, that if you can reach agreement on this, perhaps it is possible to move forward on that. But it's safe to also say that this is also a region that really is awash with conflict, and certainly there are a fair number of very powerful weapons at play and people who appear not to be afraid to use them. And moving back from that kind of behavior to cooperation is hard. In short, there is not going to be, as South Africans like to say, a kumbaya moment once the agreement comes into force. There will be the possibility of encouraging the possibility of discussing the possibilities. And maybe that's enough in some cases, because some of these conflicts are deep, they go back a long time. By the participants, they certainly see them as intractable. And just as a for instance, if this agreement leads to a broader, more regional discussion about resources like, just for example, water usage, which is crucial for many of the countries involved, that would in itself be an extraordinary moment. It wouldn't flow directly from the agreement, but it would flow from the climate that the agreement begins to help give birth to. As far as the second question, I stand by my prediction that ultimately the veto will not be overturned, which means that at some point in the next some weeks, it will begin to take effect from the U.S. perspective. But that does, after all, raise the question that so far at least all 16 people who say they want to be president on the Republican side will all have a view that says they don't wish to subscribe to, adhere to, or to agree on this agreement. But the important thing is it will already be in effect, and certain measures will have already begun to take place. Certain sanctions will already have begun to be rolled back. Certain inspections, or the inspection regimen at least, will already have begun to take place. Certain unfreezing of assets will already have occurred. A new reality, in effect, will have been created. In the worst case, even if, let's say, and I don't think this will happen, but let's say somebody like John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, wins the election for the Republicans, says, I'm opposed to the agreement in principle. It is also likely that in such a case, they will say something like, we are not going to insist that it be torn up and discarded as long as the other party continues to adhere to its prescriptions. And I think some of this will move into the direction of the unsaid as opposed to the deliberate decisions to revoke American participation in it. I could be wrong, obviously, but I think the logic of it says, as long as the agreement is producing the results that were envisioned for it, it seems unreasonable for a candidate, then president, to say, because it's working so well, we therefore must get rid of it, would be the logic of such a decision. As far as the third question, and Ambassador Saluja may not remember me, but we knew each other back in 1991 or 92, I think.
Yes.
You had more hair, I think, sir. And I was younger. I don't think that multinational corporations and the government work in lockstep. I don't think there's a secret coven where they sit down and say, all right, let's look where the compass points and we're going to move to this. I do think that what has happened is that oil as a determinant of international policy, oil as a determinant of international strategy, is taking less and less space. And there are other opportunities and other possibilities. On the bad side of such things, conflict gives companies a chance to sell weapons. On the good side of things, a civilian population desperate for consumer goods, a new population, is a perfect market for companies interested in expanding. As I said in my initial presentation, Iran has a large population of youthful people interested in achieving more access to the world's marketplace. And I think many companies see that as something to their advantage. I don't think that you will see the kind of dramatic shift that the import of your question would lead people to immediately imply. I'll give you an example and then I'll yield the floor. When the US and Cuba signed the reestablishment of diplomatic relations, my left-leaning friends, instead of berating the United States over its boycott and embargo against Cuba, were suddenly reduced to saying, oh no, Cuba is going to be awash in American companies and there'll be a McDonald's on every corner and everything Cuban will disappear, go see it now. And the answer, of course, is things don't happen like that. They move rather more slowly, they move more deliberately. Companies do a little trial and error. Companies begin to think of the possibilities, and over time, things change. But important in the Cuban circumstances, just as an example, it's not the companies so much as it is the people who will buy the products. And who's leading the charge for better trade with Cuba and the United States? It's agricultural commodity exporters. Why? Because Cuba is a large market of people who would like to buy cheaper food and like to buy more variety of food. I think you will find that if this agreement holds, it creates the possibilities. Again, we're just dealing now with possibilities for more trade and investment opportunities. But there are a whole range of calculations a company makes before it decides to plunk down $3 or $4 billion in a country to establish new factories or distribution plants or export facilities. They wait, they look, they check, they think. It takes a while. You won't see that happening overnight. You will see over time a shift in that direction. But you'll see it less and less in the oil sector and more in all the other kinds of products. Now, if you believe that advice, you can hire me as an advisor for your investments and we'll talk. No, in all seriousness, I don't see it as a cataclysmic shift. I see it as an incremental one as companies begin to see more possibilities where they saw very few, if any. And I think I'll now yield to.
Okay, as for the first question that was asked, I think, well, Iran considers security in Iraq as its own security because Iran is sharing a very extensive border with Iraq. And I think Iran will continue to support those groups that are fighting ISIS indiscriminately, whether they are Sunni or Shia. I think this would be the agreement would actually make Iran's influence in Iraq even more stronger because in a way it gives Iran's legitimacy to be an actor in Iraq. About the second question was asked from you, so I don't. And the third question, I don't have an expertise to answer to that question. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, let's take a next round. Hands? Yes.
Azadi from Iran, here in Pretoria. Of course, I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of Iran government in and Iran embassy in Pretoria. First of all, I want to point out that the mindset and the paradigm which choose the war at the expense of diplomacy and negotiations, and also select a zero-sum game at the expense of win-win situations, is opposing this deal. As President Obama said, I think the only one which is opposing this agreement is Israel. I just want to ask Mr. Brooks, what is the reason that Israel is opposing this agreement, which the international community exactly supporting this agreement as a new and historic opportunity, not only for the region, but also it will have significant implications for the whole world. And the thing is that this opportunity, this deal, in my point of view, is provide lasting peace, stability, in the volatile region like Middle East, why Israel is opposing this deal, which has these significant implications for the whole region? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, at the back, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about the factors that pushed the US to a deal. Inside Iran, what are the factors or the forces that pushed Iran to a deal as well? Of course, within Iran as well, there were forces for and against the deal throughout the years. Yeah, that is the one question. The second question, if the US don't veto or they agree to the deal, what impact does it have on the rest of the parties of the P5+1 and the status of the deal internationally?
Thank you. Can I say, Brooks, you'll take the first question from the Mr. Azadi, and from the second set, Zeinab, you'll take the first question, and Brooks the second one.
My name is Amir. I work for a global organization, climate justice organization by the name of 350.org. My question is quite obvious. It goes, I mean, as much as we appreciate the international deal, I want to go back to the nuclear power as a whole in Iran and the issue of nuclear, and also South Africa taking that route as well in the next few years. As we are aware, Iran is already dealing with some of the most catastrophic climate change issues, and it is one of the most vulnerable countries within the region that is suffering not only from access to water, but other issues that are happening. Having that in mind, Iran is also one of the best geographically situated countries for clean energy, such as solar and wind. Why is it that Iran emphasizes on using nuclear power, even though its infrastructures are really old, that go back to almost 30 years ago, and kind of old Russian technology, and not also having the strategic positions in place in terms of crisis, the nuclear crisis that happened in Chernobyl and also in Fukushima? Why is it Iran not going, clean energy route and emphasizing on nuclear? And also in relation to South Africa. South Africa is, recently going to sign a deal, I hope not, that will cost the state over 1 trillion rand, that could bankrupt the nation. And South Africa is also one of the countries that are geographically situated in a region that is very clean energy friendly. So I would appreciate your response. Brooks, feel free to answer that question from your point of view as well.
Thank you. Well, all right. You can always trust the environmentalists to come and make things difficult when we're having a nice conversation. Zeinab, do you want to start?
About the forces inside Iran that actually encouraged or led to the nuclear deal. Of course, I should tell that actually the sanctions put pressure on ordinary Iranians. Iran's currency decreased to, actually, everything that we wanted to buy it tripled during just a year, and then we had trouble getting medicine and necessary goods. I think that Iranians actually can take this very important into their consideration, and that there was a pressure on ordinary Iranians. This is an important issue, but at the same time, I have to say that Iranians didn't come to negotiating table just because of the sanctions. Iran has been under pressure over years, and Iranians, even during President Ahmadinejad, who is considered to be very conservative, even at that time, they were trying to solve the problem. In 2010, there was this Tehran Declaration. Based on that Tehran Declaration, Iran agreed to a fuel swap to send, enriching uranium to other countries and import it from Brazil or Turkey. There was this. But the Americans actually violated the terms of that agreement, though they show some positive signals that they are going to accept it. So I think the Iranians have been negotiating. We will not deny that the sanctions put pressure on ordinary Iranians, and this was one important point that actually in a way, put the new government. This was the first priority of Dr. Rouhani's actually foreign policy to solve the nuclear issue. About the second question, it was about Iran's nuclear power, why Iran is not using solar or wind. Well, actually, Iran is also developing this. As far as I know, I'm not, again, expertise in this region, but as far as I know, Iran is developing solar and wind energy as well. But Iran needs it for electricity and producing electricity. And at the same time, after the sanctions in recent years, I think in the past 4 years, Iranians tried to produce medical isotopes, which Iran could not import. So it was an important impetus for Iranians to continue with the program, so that they will have this independency. That if the world actually ceases to send what Iranians need, they can produce it inside Iran. Also, I have to say that it is a sort of national pride. There is a huge investment. This is not actually the program goes back to the Shah during 1968, when Iran actually, with the support of the West, was trying to build nuclear facilities. But after the revolution, it ceased. It was seized. So Iran, I think it has both. Both Iran needs it for electricity. Iran needs it for humanitarian. Using it for medical isotopes. And at the same time, there is this national pride that the Iranians think, okay, we can do something that other world powers could do before. And this is actually, I think, an important issue.
Okay, I have what amounts to 2.5 questions here. Let's take the half question first, because I was asked to comment some way on nuclear power. Suffice it to say that this is a conflicted area for lots of different governments, not the least of which is the one here, which either is or isn't moving forward in nuclear power, depending on which minister you listen to at any given day. But even in Japan, which you would have expected after its problems with the Fukushima Daiichi reactor, they're moving back to reopen that particular reactor, in part because it represents a diversification of energy and power sources rather than simply a movement into nuclear. I think the key here is diversification. As a parenthetical expression, I would add that many, many years ago, I read an article in Scientific American which talked to passive air conditioning in ancient Persia, in towers with particular holes and pipes poked in the sides of a tower to generate cooler air being brought into a building, something on the order of 1,300 years ago. So obviously, people have been thinking about the question for quite a while. They don't always have an easy solution. No, I wouldn't want a nuclear reactor next to me either. But that's beyond my power to decide. The first question, more seriously, I would take issue with the question of that it is only Israel who opposes the agreement. The Saudis, for example, have made it fairly clear, although they haven't made public statements because that isn't their style of announcement. They've made it very clear in private conversations to any number of people that they really, really, really do not like, do not enjoy, do not accept, do not appreciate, pick your choice there, this agreement for strategic reasons as they see them. And that leads naturally to the other half of your question as to why the Israeli government has made the statements that it has. And I think in a sense, I prefaced that in my original remarks with one footnote. It's so easy for us, for me, for others, to say a country does X, when in fact a country doesn't do anything. Individual leaders in a country make decisions that lead to decisions that lead to actions. And because the Israeli polity is such a wide open, diverse political universe, it is not even true that within Israel itself there is unanimity on opposition to the agreement. There are a fair number of fairly high-level figures, including some retired generals and others, who have come out in favor of the agreement. There are any number of civil society groups that have done so, and although I don't have the data in front of me, I know that some of the opposition parties have. You should note, for example, that Benjamin Netanyahu did not win an overwhelming majority of the parliament's seats. He won a bare majority with a couple of supporting parties. Does the entire population like the agreement? I think not. Does the entire population wish it had been a stronger agreement? I think so. I think the reason for this, though, is, and if you were able to bring Prime Minister Netanyahu into the room and let him explain it for himself, he would say, this is an existential decision for us. It is a political decision for you. And whether you agree with that or not, you have to respect the idea that from his perspective, any mistake on this decision is one that could theoretically be a fatal one for him, whereas for other countries, whether it's the United States or Russia or Germany, it's a foreign policy failure, but it's not a fatal mistake. And I think that's part of the reason why we get to where we are now in Netanyahu's statements. He's made a point in a number of places to say that he would have been in favor of a stronger agreement. Now, I personally don't think, as we said earlier, that a stronger agreement would have been achieved, because necessarily it had to be an agreement that was acceptable to both sides of the discussion. And you can say everything you want should be in an agreement, but if the other side won't sign off to it, it's not an agreement. And what it does do, and I think he's wrong in this regard, is that it gives more breathing space to see changes in national behavior, and I think that's an important and I think a hopeful sign. Where was I here? Oh, yes, sorry. The second thing that I'm supposed to deal with, if the U.S. does not, if Republicans win in 2016 and they elect not to support the agreement, or if the veto is not upheld, how does it impact the agreement as a whole and the behavior of other nations? Well, as I think we talked about that a little bit at the beginning, it doesn't necessarily change the agreement itself, because the agreement is not bilateral in nature. It is not Iran and the United States solemnly agree to do X, Y, or Z. It certainly makes it harder to get it enforced. It certainly opens up opportunities to disagree about what conditions exist. But I go back to my original phrasing that as long as Obama is president, and presuming that the agreement is upheld, so many facts will have changed on the ground by the time he is no longer president, that absent any reneging on the nature of the agreement, or theoretically finding a reservoir of uranium-235 that nobody knew about, absent any of those, even a Republican president would find it hard to simply say, we no longer adhere to this agreement, especially since it's working. And that would be their challenge, and that would be the problem they would have to address. They'd have to come up with a plausible reason why they must back out. And I think the longer it runs and the more deeply it is upheld and adhered to by the parties involved and the inspection regime and so forth, the harder it will be to just back out and move away. Will there be ructions? Will there be problems? Will there be difficulties? Of course. And we'll see them in the newspaper headlines just about as fast as they take place, because everybody will rush to leak them or defend them or oppose them or whatever.
Are there any last-minute burning questions before we break for coffee? Anyone? Yes.
My name is Netabo Sitata, and I am South African. Well, I would also love to introduce a positive question, which is quite very frank. I would love to know what is actually the opportunity cost analysis of the deal from the spectacles of Iran. To say, but then if we indeed actually succeed within these negotiations, what does it get to benefit? And what will also be the cost of failure?
Thank you.
My comment is related to why the Israelis and Saudis are opposing the deal. I think many observers have made the point that it's not because the deal does not reasonably provide the reassurances that the Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon, but it's more to do with the fact that it will create an environment, because of the fact that you mentioned, that could potentially improve relations of Iran with other partners in the region and beyond, and increase its regional and international influence, which they don't obviously want to see. I wanted to also maybe ask a question. How do you assess the reaction and likely implications for another important player in the region, which is Turkey?
Thank you. Zeinab will take the first question, add the second if you wish, and Brooks the second if you want.
Well, about the cost and benefits for Iran, I think there would be a huge cost for both sides, not just for Iranian side. For Iran, it will mean that Rouhani actually will lose its, in a way, it is because he had invested a lot in winning this agreement, and if it fails, then he's going to lose, I think, probably the next election. And that means that the next actually administration might take a harsher stance. And it's not going to be that willing to make such concessions and flexibility. This would be from the Iranian side, but I think for the Americans also, it would discredit, as I think Obama said himself, that it would discredit the Americans if, for example, Congress fails to agree with the agreement. Because, there is, but the benefit is that this consensus over Iran's nuclear file, which was securitized, it will be broken. Then you will have P5+1 countries and the United States and others who would think, well, the Iranian side tried and made the concessions necessary to reaching a deal, but this was the other side that actually did not keep up with its commitments.
I'm going to leave the question of opportunity, cost, and benefits. I think my panel colleague has addressed them, and I think it should be evident from what I've said already that I think there are significant benefits as well as possible costs, and I think on the whole the benefits outweigh the costs. With regard to the second comment, which started out as an observation but which actually leaves a question in mind, as to why the Saudis and the Israelis both appear to oppose this particular agreement as it is stated now, and the understanding that it is out of a fear of, or a concern for, I guess is probably better, Iranian regional hegemonistic behavior. I think that's clearly part of it. I think you're absolutely right. It's foolish to ignore that part of things, just as it would be foolish for either country to ignore the possibility of the further nuclearization of the region, and just as it would be foolish for either country to ignore further conflict zones within the region. But we're dealing in an area which is already sufficiently conflicted that it is not entirely clear to me that increased peaceable behavior with Iran and the rest of the international community, with an increased flow of consumer goods, an increased trade, an increased investment, an increased movement of persons, is necessarily going to feed hegemonic behavior as opposed to move it in the other direction. The needle can go both ways. And again, that falls into the category of let's predict the future. The problem is that it's easy for me to say that, but the security officials in both of those countries are confronted with the question of what if? What if? And right at the outset, my panel colleague was speaking about the nature of Iranian nuclear ambitions and going through a fairly detailed discussion about them, and quoting a variety of people who said that the Iranians had no interest in building a weapon and so forth. The problem is that they are talking about measuring behavior on the ground as it is. It is much harder for analysts to measure capability as opposed to intent. Neither of those two factors can be reduced to an easy kind of statement or equation. And that unfortunately or fortunately mostly I think unfortunately, is the role of the Saudis and the Israelis in trying to evaluate this, which is where it leads back to the way Netanyahu has made his case publicly. Although it's a case I think that the Saudis would make almost identically, were they of such a behavior mode to do it. As far as Turkey, whoa, thank you, that's hard.